The phantom typist. We've all seen them in restaurants, meetings, or even at parties. The person who simply cannot put their phone down, constantly texting or scrolling through social media while others attempt to engage with them. The phantom typist exists in a split reality, physically present but mentally elsewhere. The digital nomad might believe they're multitasking effectively, but research shows they're actually failing at both tasks simultaneously. The worst examples appear at intimate dinner gatherings where the phone acts as a digital force field against connection. Meanwhile, others at the table exchange those knowing glances that say, "Why did we even invite them?" The phantom typist might occasionally glance up with a "sorry, what?" before diving back into their digital universe, completely unaware of the social damage they're causing. What makes this particularly frustrating is that the typist often believes they're being subtle. Pro tip: holding your phone under the table while your thumbs move frantically isn't fooling anyone. The irony is that most messages can wait, but the relationships being damaged by this behavior often can't be repaired as easily. The loudmouth. The human who somehow missed the volume control installation during their formative years. Loudmouths operate under the misguided belief that the decibel level of their voice directly correlates to the importance of their thoughts. These are the people having full volume phone conversations in quiet coffee shops, libraries, and even, heaven help us, movie theaters. The classic loudmouth scenario unfolds on public transportation when someone decides that everyone deserves to hear both sides of their heated argument with a significant other. Suddenly, 40 strangers become unwilling therapists to a relationship they have no investment in. Their indoor voice is everyone else's outdoor voice, creating an acoustic invasion that's impossible to ignore. What's particularly fascinating is how loudmouths often become defensive when politely asked to lower their volume, as though you're the one violating social norms by not wanting to hear about their ingrown toenail treatment in excruciating detail while you're trying to enjoy your cappuccino. Hashtag every social glitch explained in 15 minutes. The thankless guest. We've all hosted them at some point. Those people who accept invitations, consume food and drinks, and then disappear without so much as a "thanks for having me." The thankless guest enjoys the benefits of others' hospitality while somehow missing the fundamental reciprocity that makes social interactions function. The classic example is the dinner party attendee who eats heartily, drinks extensively, and then vanishes into the night without acknowledging the hours of preparation their host invested. Even worse is the wedding guest who enjoys an expensive meal and open bar but can't be bothered to send a thank you note or even a text message afterward. The digital age has made gratitude even easier to express. A quick text takes a second, which makes the absence of thanks all the more glaring. The thankless guest seems to operate under the assumption that their mere presence was gift enough, leaving hosts wondering if their effort was actually appreciated or merely consumed. The pointer. Armed with an extended finger and zero awareness, the pointer identifies people in public as though they're selecting items from a menu. "Look at this guy's weird haircut," they'll announce while physically directing everyone's attention to the unfortunate subject of their observation. The pointer seems oblivious to the fact that human beings can feel when they're being singled out. Whether it's commenting on someone's outfit, appearance, or behavior, the pointer creates instant discomfort for everyone involved. What makes this particularly cringeworthy is when the pointer lowers their voice while maintaining their directional gesture, as though the whisper somehow neutralizes the pointing. Cultural variations exist worldwide. In many Asian countries, pointing with fingers is considered extremely rude, with people using their entire hand or even chin to indicate direction instead. Yet, the pointer blissfully continues their finger-based identification system, leaving embarrassment in their wake. The assumptive guest. This social miscreant operates under the principle that generosity is always someone else's responsibility. When the bill arrives, they study it intensely, then casually lean back without reaching for their wallet. Or perhaps they order the most expensive menu items when someone else is treating, suddenly developing a taste for lobster and premium spirits. The assumptive guest masters the art of conversational vanish when payment discussions arise. They might suddenly need to use the restroom when the check appears, or develop an intense interest in something happening across the room. Their financial contribution remains theoretical, while others pick up the very real tab. What's particularly frustrating is how the assumptive guest often becomes a repeat offender, creating a pattern where friends begin to factor in the behavior when planning gatherings. Eventually, invitations dwindle as people tire of subsidizing someone else's socializing. The misreader. With all the perceptive abilities of a brick wall, the misreader consistently fails to interpret the nonverbal cues that smooth social interactions. They continue telling lengthy stories while their listeners repeatedly check their watch. They lean in uncomfortably close while others lean progressively backwards. They miss the cross arms, averted gazes, and subtle shifts that signal "please stop talking" or "I need space." The misreader's greatest hits include continuing conversations long after others have signaled their desire to conclude, telling inappropriate jokes despite the uncomfortable silence that followed their previous attempts, and initiating physical contact with people who are clearly uncomfortable with it. What makes the misreader particularly challenging is that they're often well-intentioned, just operating with a broken social antenna. They genuinely don't understand why people seem to avoid them or conversations suddenly become awkward, creating a feedback loop of increasingly uncomfortable interactions. The oversharer. Within minutes of meeting the oversharer, you'll know about their recent divorce, ongoing therapy journey, financial troubles, and that mysterious rash they've been battling. They treat casual conversations like confessional booths, unloading intensely personal information that leaves us wondering how to respond appropriately. The classic oversharer might begin with seemingly normal conversations before rapidly accelerating into territory that would make a therapist take notes. Nice weather we're having. Speaking of moisture, my doctor says my usual sweating condition might be hormonal. They transform coffee breaks into impromptu therapy sessions where they're both patient and practitioner. What's particularly interesting is how the oversharer creates an imbalanced relationship dynamic where they've shared vulnerabilities that the listener hasn't consented to receiving. This forces others into an uncomfortable position of either matching this inappropriate level of disclosure or appearing standoffish by maintaining boundaries. The conversation dominator. This verbal steamroller treats dialogue as a monologue with occasional breaks for breathing. The conversation dominator sees questions as brief interruptions in their ongoing narrative rather than genuine invitations for others to contribute. They've mastered the art of appearing to engage while actually just waiting for others to finish so they can resume talking. The dominator's natural habitat is group settings, where they can hold court while others exchange glances, wondering if they'll ever get a word in. They interrupt frequently, often with some versions of "that reminds me of when I," before launching into another extended personal antidote. Questions they ask are merely rhetorical setups for their own answers. The particular frustrations with dominators is that they often believe they're excellent conversationalists, mistaking the polite silence of others for rapt attention rather than the resignation it actually represents. They leave interactions feeling they've made connections, while others leave feeling invisible. The eye avoider. Mastering the art of looking everywhere except at the person they're speaking with. The eye avoider creates instant discomfort in social interactions. Their gaze might fixate on the ceiling, their shoes, or some fascinating middle distance that apparently contains invisible entertainment only they can perceive. In professional settings, the eye avoider undermines their own credibility as their shifty gaze creates an immediate impression of dishonesty or insecurity regardless of their actual integrity. In personal conversations, they generate a sense of disconnection, leaving others wondering if they're actually engaged or mentally scheduling their grocery list. Cultural variations in eye contact norms certainly exist, but the eye avoider operates below the comfortable threshold in virtually any culture. What's particularly fascinating is how contagious this behavior can be. Conversations with eye avoiders often lead others to also begin looking away, creating an awkward dance of mutual visual avoidance. The humorless. Not to be confused with someone who simply doesn't laugh easily, the humorless actively ruins jokes through misplaced timing, poor delivery, or explaining the punchline immediately afterward. Get it? Because the chicken actually had a motivation for crossing the road that wasn't explicitly stated. They transform potentially humorous moments into awkward silences through their commitment to destroying comedy. The humorless often doubles down when jokes fall flat, repeating them louder or explaining why they're funny, digging themselves deeper into the pit of social awkwardness. Their attempts at humor frequently involve outdated references, offensive material they don't recognize as inappropriate, or inside jokes that only they understand. What makes the humorless particularly painful to witness is their genuine belief that they're contributing positively to the social atmosphere, completely missing the winces and forced smiles their attempts at levity produce. They might even describe themselves as having a great sense of humor in their dating profiles, setting up inevitable disappointment. The self-deprecator. While occasional self-deprecation can be charming, the self-deprecator turns self-criticism into an art form that makes everyone uncomfortable. They respond to compliments with immediate contradictions, transform achievements into failures through their narrative, and create situations where others feel obligated to provide constant reassurance. "I like your presentation" is met with, "Oh, it was terrible. I messed up everything. I'm surprised you didn't fire me on the spot." This forces the complimenter into either abandoning their positive assessment or working harder to convince the self-deprecator of their value, creating an exhausting dynamic. The self-deprecator often believes they're demonstrating humility, but they're actually fishing for validation while simultaneously rejecting it, a frustrating paradox for those around them. What makes this particularly damaging is how it trains others to stop offering genuine positive feedback, as they know it will only initiate another round of denial and emotional labor. The passive listener. With glazed eyes and occasional nods that never quite align with the conversation's content, the passive listener performs a convincing imitation of someone paying attention without actually absorbing anything being said. They might occasionally interject with "wow" or "that's crazy" at inappropriate moments, revealing their mental absence. The telltale sign of the passive listener is their inability to engage with what was just said. Ask them a direct question about the information they were just given, and they'll perform a spectacular verbal dance to avoid admitting they weren't listening. They might offer vague responses or suddenly become very interested in a specific detail they did manage to catch while their mind was wandering. What makes this behavior particularly insulting is that it communicates that the speaker's thoughts aren't worth the minimal effort required to actually listen. The passive listener might be physically present, but their attention is elsewhere, creating a one-sided exchange that leaves others feeling unvalued. The conversation killer. Just as a discussion gains momentum or depth, the conversation killer delivers a verbal dead end that stops dialogue in its tracks. Anyway, they might say before physically turning away, or they might respond to a thoughtful question with a simple "yep" before checking their phone. They possess an uncanny ability to deflate conversational energy through minimal effort. The conversation killer might deploy non-sequiturs that leave others mentally whiplashed. "So I've been thinking about changing careers. My cat vomited this morning." These abrupt topic changes signal their disinterest in continuing along the established conversational path, often without offering an alternative direction. What makes this particularly frustrating is that the conversation killer frequently complains about struggling to make connections or having meaningful conversations, completely unaware that they're systematically preventing these very experiences through their communication habits. The cue miss. Oblivious to the subtle signals that regulate social interactions, the cue miss continues conversations long after others have checked watches, mentioned needing to leave, or even stood up with keys in hand. They miss the gradually widening physical distance as others attempt to create space, the shortened responses indicating decreased interest, and the explicit verbal cues that the interaction is concluding. The cue miss specializes in cornering people at parties, trapping them in conversations that feel inescapable. They misinterpret politeness as genuine enthusiasm, failing to recognize when others are simply being courteous rather than engaged. Their inability to read the room leads to consistently awkward situations where others must become increasingly explicit to end interactions. What makes the cue miss particularly challenging is that directly informing them of these missed signals often results in hurt feelings or defensiveness, creating a situation where others must either endure uncomfortable interactions or risk causing offense by being bluntly direct. The negative Nancy. The human rain cloud who transform any positive topic into an opportunity for doom and gloom. The negative Nancy has an unparalleled ability to find the worst possible interpretation of any situation, dragging conversations into existential quicksand from which they rarely emerge. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Receives, "Sure, but climate change means we won't have any more like this." Share good news about a promotion, and they'll immediately express concerns about increased work stress or statistics on how many people burn out in similar positions. Their conversational gift is the ability to deflect any moment of joy with remarkable efficiency. What makes the negative Nancy particularly exhausting is their belief that they're simply being realistic, rather than recognizing how their persistent negativity affects others. They often take pride in their honest assessments, while others mentally prepare themselves for the inevitable downward spiral before sharing any information. The party faux pas. This social offender treats invitations as loose suggestions rather than actual requests for confirmation. The party faux pas might show up unannounced to gatherings, bring uninvited guests, arrive dramatically early when hosts are still preparing, or extremely late after food has been served. They treat RSVP deadlines as optional guidelines that don't apply to their unpredictable schedule. Once at the event, they might declare dietary restrictions that weren't previously mentioned, wander into off-limit areas of the home, or help themselves to food or drinks that were clearly intended for later. Their timing for announcement is invariably poor, choosing quiet moments to share conversational opinions or personal news that shifts attention to themselves. What makes the party faux pas particularly frustrating is how their behavior creates cascading problems for hosts, from insufficient food to disrupted timing to uncomfortable dynamics among other guests. Their inability to follow basic social protocols creates unnecessary stress in what should be enjoyable gatherings. The giftless guest. Arriving consistently empty-handed to events where contribution is customary, the giftless guest benefits from others' generosity while offering nothing in return. Whether it's dinner parties, housewarming celebrations, or potlucks, they appear without even token offerings, seemingly oblivious to the one-sided nature of their participation. The giftless guest often compensates with effusive verbal appreciation. "Everything looks amazing," or "You're such a wonderful host," while never translating this admiration into reciprocal actions. They might promise future contributions that never materialize or claim they didn't know it was customary to bring something, despite repeated experiences indicating otherwise. What makes this behavior particularly noticeable is its consistency over time. While anyone might occasionally forget to bring something, the giftless guest establishes a clear pattern that eventually alters how hosts and other guests perceive them, creating a reputation that's difficult to shed. The disregarder of boundaries. Personal space means nothing to this boundary-challenged individual. The disregarder stands uncomfortably close during conversations, initiates physical contact without consent, and asks invasively personal questions within minutes of meeting someone new. They treat others' boundaries as suggestions rather than firm limits, creating immediate discomfort. In conversation, they probe into topics others have clearly indicated are off limits. You mentioned you don't talk about your divorce, but what really happened? They might touch pregnant women's bellies without permission, look over shoulders at private messages, or enter spaces without knocking. Their curiosity consistently overrides others' comfort. What makes the disregarder particularly problematic is how they often frame their invasiveness as friendliness or interest, making others feel unreasonable for establishing normal boundaries. Their inability to recognize or respect personal limits forces others into uncomfortable positions of becoming explicitly firm or avoiding them entirely. The latecomer. Perpetually arriving after the agreed-upon time, the latecomer treats schedules as loose suggestions rather than actual commitments. Their chronic tardiness communicates that their time is more valuable than others', creating ripple effects of disruption in both social and professional contexts. The latecomer has an extensive repertoire of excuses, from traffic and alarm malfunctions to vague, "you wouldn't believe what happened" stories that never quite explain the actual delay. They express surprise at others' frustration as though punctuality were an unreasonable expectation rather than a basic courtesy. What makes this behavior particularly frustrating is how it forces others to either wait uncomfortably, start without them, creating awkwardness upon their arrival, or build in buffer time when scheduling with them, essentially penalizing everyone else for the latecomer's inability to manage time effectively. The social media oversharer. Without consent or consideration, the social media overshare documents and publicizes moments that others might have preferred to keep in private. They post unflattering photos, share sensitive information discussed in confidence, or tag people in content that could be problematic for professional or personal reasons. The oversharer lives by the philosophy that if something happened, it must be shared immediately and comprehensively. They might live tweet conversations, post play-by-plays of gatherings as they unfold, or share images of people in vulnerable or unflattering moments. When called out, they often respond with confusion. But it already happened. What's the problem with sharing it? What makes this behavior particularly problematic in the digital age is its permanence and reach. The social media overshare doesn't just violate privacy in the moment, they create digital records that can have lasting consequences for those captured without their knowledge or permission, fundamentally misunderstanding that experiencing something doesn't automatically grant the right to broadcast it. That's it for now. Which social faux pas bothers you the most? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.